In this screencast, we're going to discuss basic plotting techniques. I'm going to show to you how to use the MATLAB plot command to plot a single line. Then we're going to discuss how to add labels, titles, and also how to plot sets of lines, where the data for the lines are organized in a matrix. And finally, I'm going to show to you how to organize plots in different panels. Previously, we've entered all our commands on the command window. However, now we'll transition to entering our code, all our commands, in the editor window. Now for this example, I've already entered some data. I've entered some x values and some y values. The x's here represent the number of days that people train in a learning experiment, and the y's represent the performance levels at each number of days trained for different age groups. So we have y1, y2, y3, y4 represent 4 different age groups. So let's create a simple plot. Suppose we enter plot x, y1, and then we enter the following string, and we want to execute this code. So we go to the editor window and we find this run button. So we press the run button. It executes all the lines of code in your current script. And so MATLAB creates this figure, and for convenience this figure is docked in my MATLAB window over here. On your end, this figure window might be popping up at some other place on your desktop. So MATLAB has created this simple line plot, and the appearance of this line plot is affected by this string. So this is the line specification, and the R tells MATLAB to create something red. This line, this dash, tells MATLAB to create a solid line, and the O tells MATLAB to create a line with circles as markers. Now you can also change the colors, let's say to something blue, or I want markers that are triangles, upside down triangles, and again I can run this and MATLAB has created something in a slightly different format. Now suppose I want to show 2 lines at once in the same plot. So I can add another plot command. Let's say I copy this code, and now I want to also visualize the second data series from Y2. And let's say that the first line I use a red line with circles, and the second line I want to use blues and triangles. I execute the code, but I actually don't see the first red line. And the reason is that MATLAB needs to be told to hold on to the first line that was plotted. So you actually need to use this command hold on to tell MATLAB not to delete that first plot that it created. So if we run this code, now we can see actually 2 lines in the same figure window. Now to improve this graph, we can add some code. Now we can improve this graph by adding some labels. So I can add an X label, the number of days. I can add a Y label for the Y-axis. Let's call it performance. And I can give the figure a title. Let's call it learning curves. So if I run this code, you can see that labels were added to the X-axis, Y-axis, and a title was added as well. Another thing we can do is to change the limits of the X and Y-axis. So I can add this xlim command, and the numbers here, this is a vector with 2 entries. The first one is the lower limit of the x-axis, and the second one is the upper limit. And similarly, we can do change the limits for the y-axis. So suppose I run this code, and now you can see that the limits have changed somewhat. Now another detail you can change is what ticks are used for this plot. Ticks on the x-axis or the y-axis. For example, I don't like the fact that this number 140 is shown here because there's no corresponding data for 140. So I can use the xticks command to tell MATLAB exactly what value should be used to place the ticks. So now basically I've used a vector from 0 to 120 spaced with spaced 40 apart. And now I have some values that look more reasonable along the x-axis. Finally, I can also add a legend to improve this graph. So I can add a command legend, and this is a cell array of strings where each entry in the cell array refers to the different data series in the plot. So if I run this, now MATLAB adds this legend over here, and I've told MATLAB that the first data series, we call that age group 21 to 30, and the second data series I call this age group 31 to 40. Now this legend is placed in a somewhat inconvenient position. You can actually tell MATLAB to place it in a different location by add these extra arguments, so location, and then the value southeast. You can use any location like northeast, northwest, etc. But if we run this, now MATLAB places this in a more convenient location. Now suppose we have a number of lines that we want to visualize, and we don't want to use separate plot commands to show each separate line. Now you can actually plot matrices using the plot command. So suppose we replace this with some new commands. I'm going to use the command CLF to actually clear the figure window before I create some new plots. And let's say that we have a matrix Y that consists of all these Y1 to Y4 data series organized as columns. So we have a column of Y1 and Y2, Y3, Y4, and we put all those columns together in a single matrix Y. Now we can use the plot command to plot the values of X and all the different columns of Y, of the matrix Y. And if we run this code, so MATLAB automatically used different colors to visualize the different line series. And I've told MATLAB to keep using these solid lines and these circles as marker symbols. And by the way, if you want to play around with the different line styles and different specifications for these lines, in the help documentation, you can find under line spec, you can find all the different ways in which you can specify different line styles. So we've used this dash, right, marker before that creates a solid line. But if you use two dashes, it creates a dash line. You can use different marker symbols, plus, circle, asterisk, etc. And here are the different letter codes to create different colors. Now, one more thing you can do in MATLAB is to organize these plots in different panels. So suppose I don't want to organize the data in this way in a single panel, but I want to have multiple panels. So let's delete this code over here, and I'm going to copy and paste some previous code that I entered. Now, if we run this code, I'll first run the code and then explain what the code is doing. So I'm using the subplot command here to create a number of different panels. So the subplot command uses 3 arguments. The first 2 arguments tell MATLAB how many panels to create horizontally, the number of rows. The second one is the number of columns, so how many panels horizontally to use. And then the third number is the index of the subplot. So this is the first subplot, this is the second subplot. So after you tell MATLAB which panel to create, then you can just use various plot commands to visualize the data for that particular plot. And you can give it separate titles, X labels, and Y labels. Now over here on this line, I've told MATLAB, okay, so keep this organization of a 1 by 2 panels, and now create the second one in this series. And I've now visualized the Y2 data series in this particular panel. Now I can also organize the data differently. So suppose I delete this code, and again I copy and paste some existing code that I created. So if we have this code, Let's execute this code over here. So now I've told MATLAB to create 4 panels. So I have a 2x2 panel organization, right? So 2 panels horizontally, 2 panels vertically. And I go through each of these subplots. This is the first subplot, this is the second one, third one, and fourth one. So these indices, 1, 2, 3, and 4, they refer to the different panels in reading order. And again, I've sort of used different data series to plot for each panel.